The crowd has me backed against the baker's wall when he steps out of the shadows, and everything I thought I understood about the quiet man from table 6 falls apart in the space of a single breath. "That's enough," he says. Not loud, just certain, the way he's always been certain, whether he was asking for his tea or reading in the corner while the inn buzzed around him. The mob doesn't argue. The mob drops to its knees. Every single one of them, merchants and labourers and the innkeeper's own furious son, folding to the cobblestones like his voice has physically bent their spines. I stand there with my back against rough stone, chest heaving, and I finally understand what I've been too busy, too tired, too ordinary to notice all week. I've been serving tea to the Alpha King the week before he arrived on a Monday, unremarkable in every way that should have mattered. I remember, because Mondays are slow at the Wandering Hearth, the inn where I've worked for 6 years, ever since my father's debts forced me into service, instead of the education my mother had once hoped for me. Slow Mondays mean I have time to actually notice new arrivals instead of rushing between overlapping demands, and this one caught my attention specifically because he didn't ask for anything. Most travellers who stop at our inn want something loudly: a room, food, information about the roads ahead. Sometimes, simply attention, the particular performance of importance that comes naturally to men who've never had to earn consideration. This one settled into the corner table without ceremony, ordered tea in a voice so quiet I had to lean forward to hear him properly, and then simply sat, reading a worn book, for 3 hours. "Anything else?" I asked, when I brought his tea. "No, thank you," he said. "This is perfect." Something about the simplicity of it stuck with me. Most travellers complicate their requests, layer them with unnecessary detail or subtle demands disguised as politeness. He just wanted tea, and when he had it, he was satisfied. He returned the next morning. And the next. By Wednesday, I'd started preparing his tea before he even asked. The specific blend he preferred, steeped exactly as long as he liked it, because I'd learned his preferences the way you learn anyone's after enough repeated small interactions. "You remembered," he said, when I set the cup down without him having to order. "You're predictable," I said, which probably wasn't the most professional observation to offer a paying customer, but something about his quiet presence made formality feel unnecessary. He smiled, small, genuine, the kind of smile that doesn't perform anything for an audience, because there's no audience to perform for. "I like predictable," he said. "It's rarer than you'd think." The conversations, our interactions, grew slowly over the following days. The way conversations do when neither person is rushing towards some larger purpose. I learned that he travelled frequently, though he was vague about the specific reasons. I learned he read constantly, worked through books at a pace that suggested genuine hunger for whatever knowledge they contained, not performed intellectualism. I learned he asked questions about my life, with what felt like actual curiosity, not the empty politeness most travellers offered before returning attention to themselves. "What made you choose this work?" He asked me on Thursday, during one of the inn's quieter afternoon lulls, when I had a few minutes to actually sit near his table instead of rushing past with orders. "I didn't exactly choose it," I admitted. "My father's debts needed paying. Serving tables was available work that didn't require resources I didn't have. Do you regret it?" I considered this honestly, which surprised me, because most people asking about my circumstances wanted reassurance that everything had worked out fine, not genuine reflection. "Sometimes," I said. "I wanted to study healing, actually, before the debts. I used to help the village healer with her garden, learning about the properties of different plants, imagining a future where that knowledge might matter beyond growing herbs for my own kitchen." What happened to that dream? "Life happened," I said, with more bitterness than I intended to reveal. Debts don't care about dreams. Neither does the reality of needing steady income to keep a roof over your head. He was quiet for a moment, studying me with an attention that felt different from his usual observation. More focused, somehow. Like he was actually considering the specific injustice of dreams deferred by circumstance. "That's a shame," he said finally. "The world needs more healers who actually care about the work, not just the status it might provide." "You sound like you have opinions about healers specifically," I observed. "I've encountered enough incompetent ones to appreciate genuine skill when it's described," he said with a wry twist to his mouth that suggested a story he wasn't sharing. "The incident, I don't learn his name that week, which seems strange in retrospect, but conversations between innkeepers' staff and travelling guests rarely include formal introductions, and something about our particular dynamic never felt like it required one. The crisis that reveals everything happens on Saturday, during the busiest market day of the month. When the town square fills with vendors and buyers and the particular chaos that comes from too many people trying to accomplish too much business in too little time. I'm running an errand for the innkeeper, purchasing supplies from the market that we've run short of, when I encounter a situation that has nothing to do with me, but somehow ends with me at its centre. A merchant's cart has overturned, spilling expensive imported silk across the muddy street, and the merchant, apparently convinced that someone deliberately sabotaged him, has started accusing bystanders of theft and vandalism. The accusations spread with the particular speed that rumours gain in crowded spaces, and somehow, through a combination of proximity and unlucky timing, I become the focus of his increasingly hysterical claims. "She was near my cart," he shouts, pointing at me with the kind of certainty that has nothing to do with actual evidence. "I saw her circling it before it fell." This isn't true. I'd been walking toward the fabric merchant 3 stalls down, nowhere near his cart when it overturned. But crowds don't always require truth to turn dangerous. And this one, fueled by the merchant's escalating accusations and the particular restlessness that comes from market day crowds looking for spectacle, begins closing around me with mounting hostility. "I didn't touch your cart," I say, backing away as several men step forward with expressions that suggest they've already decided my guilt regardless of evidence. "She's lying," someone shouts from the crowd. "Look at her face. She's guilty." I don't understand how quickly this escalates, how a false accusation transforms into a mob's collective certainty within minutes, how the specific momentum of crowd anger builds toward violence, with a speed that leaves no room for reasonable intervention. I'm backed against the baker's wall, the crowd tightening around me. Several people now reaching for whatever makeshift weapons the market provides. A vendor's staff, a length of rope, the specific menace of collective anger looking for an outlet. That's when he steps forward. "The reveal, that's enough," he says. I recognize his voice before I fully process what's happening. The same quiet certainty he's used every morning ordering tea, now carrying an authority that stops the entire crowd's momentum instantly. The mob turns toward him, and I watch confusion cross several faces, the particular expression of people trying to reconcile an ordinary traveller's presence with the strange weight his voice suddenly carries. Then someone near the front of the crowd goes very pale. "Your Majesty," the person whispers, and the words spread through the crowd like fire through dry grass, transforming confusion into something closer to terror. I watch, frozen against the baker's wall, as the entire mob drops to its knees. Every single person who moments ago was reaching for weapons now presses their forehead toward the cobblestones, the specific posture of subjects encountering their sovereign unexpectedly. "Your Majesty," the merchant stammers, his earlier certainty about my guilt evaporating into pure panic. "I didn't realize. I would never have." "You accused an innocent woman of theft based on nothing but proximity and your own carelessness in securing your cart properly," the man I've known only as the quiet traveller from table 6 says. his voice still quiet, but carrying an unmistakable weight of authority. This entire crowd nearly turned violent, based on unfounded accusation. That's not justice. That's mob cruelty dressed up as righteous anger. I stare at him. Really look, past the plain travelling clothes and unassuming posture, trying to understand how I missed this. How an entire week of serving tea to this man somehow failed to reveal that he was Alpha King Corvin, ruler of this entire territory, someone whose face should have been recognizable from coins and formal portraits displayed throughout every town in his kingdom. "You're the king," I say, more statement than question, though the words feel strange coming from my own mouth. "I am," he confirms, turning to look at me directly for the first time since intervening. "I'm sorry you had to learn it this way." The explanation the crowd disperses quickly after his intervention, the merchant offering profuse apologies that I barely register. My mind still catching up with the reality of who I've been casually chatting with all week. "You should have told me," I say, once we're alone, walking back toward the wandering hearth with an escort of guards who apparently materialized from nowhere the moment his identity became known. "Would it have changed how you treated me?" he asks. I consider this honestly. Probably. I doubt I would have made casual observations about your predictability if I'd known you were royalty. "That's exactly why I didn't tell you," he says. "I travel this way deliberately, unannounced, without ceremony, specifically because I wanted to experience my kingdom the way ordinary people experience it. Not the performed deference that comes with recognized authority. Genuine interaction, unweighted by expectation." So this whole week was some kind of research project? I ask, and I hear the edge in my own voice. The specific hurt of realizing our conversations, which had felt genuine to me, might have been calculated observation from his perspective. "No," he says quickly, catching the implication. "It started that way, maybe. I do travel incognito periodically to understand my kingdom beyond formal court reports. But somewhere during that first Monday, it stopped being research and became something else. I kept returning to your inn specifically because I wanted to keep talking to you, not because I needed more information about ordinary life in my territories. How do I know that's true, and not just a convenient explanation now that you've been discovered?" "You don't," he admits. "You have no reason to trust that explanation beyond my word. And my word, given what you've just learned about my position, probably carries less weight right now than it did an hour ago when you thought I was just a quiet traveller." The complication the days following the market incident bring changes I struggle to process. Word spreads quickly through the town that the quiet traveller from the wandering hearth was actually Alpha King Corvin, and suddenly, my week of casual tea service and honest conversation becomes public spectacle, subject to gossip and speculation that makes my previously simple work environment nearly unbearable. "Is it true you didn't recognize him?" The innkeeper's wife asks me, not for the first time, her curiosity evident despite my obvious discomfort with the question. "I didn't," I confirm. "He never mentioned his position. I treated him like any other guest." "That explains why he kept coming back," she says, with the particular knowing tone of someone who thinks she's identified something significant. "Royalty gets tired of performance eventually. You gave him something genuine." I don't know how to process this observation, whether it's true or simply the kind of romantic narrative people construct when reality provides insufficient explanation for unusual behaviour. King Corvin returns to the inn the following week, though everything about the visit feels different now that his identity is common knowledge. Guards accompany him, though he requests they remain outside. The other patrons treat his presence with obvious deference. The casual atmosphere that previously characterized the inn's morning routine, now replaced by careful formality. "This isn't the same," he observes, settling into his usual corner table, though the easy familiarity between us feels strained now, weighted by everyone's awareness of exactly who's sitting there. "How did you expect it to be?" I ask, bringing his tea with hands that aren't quite as steady as they were a week ago. "You're the Alpha King. I'm an in-worker who happened to serve you tea for a week without realizing who you were. That's a significant gap that doesn't disappear just because we're both pretending things are normal." "I don't want you to pretend," he says. "I want to know if what we had, the actual conversations, the genuine interest we showed in each other, if that can survive knowing the truth. Or if my position makes that impossible now. The honest conversation I need to understand something," I tell him, finally sitting across from him properly, instead of maintaining the professional distance I've adopted since the revelation. "During that week, when you asked about my dreams, about becoming a healer, about my father's debts, was any of that genuine curiosity? Or were you simply gathering information about your subject's circumstances?" "Genuine," he says immediately, without hesitation. "I've had countless formal reports about the economic pressures facing families in this territory. I didn't need your specific story for policy purposes. I wanted to know it, because I wanted to know you. That's difficult to trust now, I admit. Everything about our interaction has changed context. I'm not sure how to have a normal conversation with someone whose entire crowd just dropped to their knees at his voice. I understand that," he says. "But I'd like the chance to prove it, if you're willing to give me one. Not through grand gestures or royal spectacle. I think we've established that neither of us particularly values that kind of performance. Just through continued honest conversation, the same kind we had before you knew who I actually was. What would that even look like now?" I ask. "You can't just sit in the corner unnoticed anymore. Everyone knows exactly who you are. Then we find somewhere else," he says. "Somewhere the conversation can continue without an audience deciding what it means before we've figured that out ourselves. The courtship, what follows over subsequent weeks, looks nothing like the grand romantic gestures typically associated with royal courtship, and everything like the continuation of what started during that first quiet week at the inn. He arranges private meetings, sometimes in the palace gardens, sometimes at small, unremarkable locations throughout the town, where our conversations can continue without the performed deference that accompanies public royal appearances. We talk about the same things we discussed when I thought he was simply a traveller. My interrupted dreams of healing work, his own complicated relationship with inherited power, the particular loneliness of positions that command respect without necessarily earning genuine connection. I've been thinking about your dream, he tells me, several weeks into this new phase of our acquaintance, during one of our garden conversations. The healing work you wanted before circumstances redirected you toward in-service. What about it? I could fund your training, he says. Formally, through the Crown's education programs. You'd study under the kingdom's most skilled healers, develop the expertise you were denied by circumstance rather than lack of aptitude. I feel something complicated at this offer. Gratitude tangled with discomfort at the specific dynamic it creates. I don't want that, I say slowly, working through my own reaction as I speak it aloud. Not because I don't want to study healing. I do, desperately, more than I've let myself want anything in years. But if you fund it, if this opportunity comes specifically from your position and interest in me, I'll never know if I actually earned it, or if it was simply given because the king wanted to please someone he was courting. That's fair, he says, though I can see him processing genuine surprise at the rejection. What would feel different? Let me find my own path to that training, I say, through the same channels available to anyone with sufficient determination and aptitude, not through royal intervention that skips past the actual work required. And if that takes years instead of the immediate access I could provide, then it takes years, I say. But it'll be mine, built through my own effort, not granted through your influence. That matters to me more than the speed of achieving it. The foundation he respects this boundary, which surprises me more than it probably should, given how thoroughly our entire acquaintance has already deviated from typical royal courtship patterns. I begin pursuing healing training through legitimate channels, apprenticing with the same village healer who once nurtured my early interest, studying during hours not claimed by in-work, building toward the formal training program available to anyone who demonstrates sufficient skill and dedication, regardless of royal connection. King Corvin continues visiting, though our meetings gradually shift from secretive garden conversations to something more publicly acknowledged as the kingdom slowly adjusts to the reality of their Alpha King's unconventional courtship. The court isn't pleased, he tells me honestly, nearly 6 months into our careful relationship, during one of our now regular evening conversations. They expected formal selection processes, appropriate lineage, the kind of political calculation that typically governs royal mate choices. Instead, they're watching their king court an in-worker who initially had no idea who he was. "Does that bother you?" I ask. "No," he says, with the same quiet certainty he's maintained throughout our entire acquaintance, because everything valuable about what we've built started before status complicated it. You liked the quiet man at table 6, not the Alpha King. I'd rather have that genuine foundation than any amount of court approval built on calculation instead of actual connection. Epilogue. The 2 years after that terrifying afternoon in the market square, I still visit the Wandering Hearth occasionally, though now as a formally trained healer rather than tea-serving staff, and as Corvin's acknowledged mate rather than an anonymous in-worker. We sit at the same corner table sometimes, the one where our entire story began during that first quiet Monday when he simply wanted tea, and I simply wanted to finish my shift without complications. "Do you remember what you said that first week?" I ask him, during one such visit, watching the current staff move through the same routine I once knew intimately, about predictable being rarer than people think. "I remember," he says. "I meant it too. Most people performing for royal attention become unpredictable in specific, calculated ways, trying to seem more interesting, more impressive, more worthy of consideration. You were just yourself, consistently, without any awareness that consistency might matter to someone in my position. I still don't perform for you," I point out. "I still tell you when I think you're wrong about kingdom policy. I still complain when you're stubborn about admitting mistakes. That's exactly why this works," he says, with the small, genuine smile I first noticed during that unremarkable Monday tea service. "You've never treated me like the Alpha King. You've always just treated me like the quiet man who liked his tea a certain way and appreciated honest conversation over performed deference." I think about that terrified moment in the market square, watching an entire crowd drop to their knees at a voice I'd only ever heard requesting tea politely. I think about how thoroughly that revelation could have destroyed something genuine, reducing our entire acquaintance to performed deference and calculated interaction. Instead, it became the foundation for something that survived the revelation precisely because it started without any awareness of who he actually was. Sometimes the truest connections happen exactly that way, not despite not knowing someone's full context, but because that ignorance strips away every calculation, every performance, every strategic consideration that typically complicates how people interact with power. He was just the quiet man at table 6. That was always enough.